Hello there. Thanks for joining us on Project Justice this week. I am Utaba Moran. 8 months after they were asked to recuse themselves from the bench over investigation on alleged corruption, the National Judicial Council, NJC, has directed that 6 of the affected judges resume duties. The council reached the decision at the end of its 82nd meeting last weekend in Abuja. This follows the failure of the federal government to file appropriate charges against the judicial officers after making a series of allegations of corruption, bribery and misconduct against them. Now, this is a story we've been following quite closely since last year. The anticipation was quite high and many Nigerians were keen to see the judges arraigned and tried. However, as noted by the NJC, only 4 have been charged. There are Justice Adeniyi Ademola, who was discharged and acquitted lately. Others are Justice Sylvester Nguta of the Supreme Court, whose trial is still pending, Justice Ruth Ofili Ajumogobia of the Federal High Court, Lagos, and the former Chief Judge of Enugu State High Court, Justice Innocent Umezurike, who had already been retired by the NJC before the anti-graft agency took up the case. Here's a report on the NJC decision.
In 2016, the Department of State Security Service invaded the homes of some judges. They were arrested and charged to court. Justice Adeniyi Ademola of the Federal High Court, Abuja, was forced to be arraigned. He was, however, discharged of any wrongdoing after his no-case submission. Justice Sylvester Nguta of the Supreme Court is still facing trial before the Federal High Court, Abuja, and the Code of Conduct Tribunal. The case of Justice Rita Ajumogobia of the Federal High Court, Lagos, also charged by the EFCC, is still ongoing. For now, only Justice Ademola is cleared of corruption charges. For 8 months, the National Judicial Council waited for charges to be filed against all the judges, but no action was taken by the security agencies. At the 82nd meeting of the Council, it therefore ordered various heads of courts to direct the suspended judges to resume their judicial duties with effect from Wednesday, 7th June 2017. The move is to facilitate dispensation of justice on all the pending cases before their arrest. The judges are Justice Inyang Okoro of the Supreme Court, Justice Uwani Abba-Aji of the Court of Appeal, Justice Idiazira Ngandiwa of the Federal High Court, Justice Adeniyi Ademola of the Federal High Court, Abuja, Justice Musa Kuya of the Federal High Court, and Justice Agbadu Fishing of National Industrial Court. One of the major decisions at the meeting was the issuance of warning to Justice Esore of the National Industrial Court, Justice Adolphus Enebeli of Rivers State High Court, and Justice Basi Etuk of Akwa Ibom State High Court. The 3 judges were equally placed on the NJC watch list. Petitions written against all the judicial officers were dismissed, while 9 of the petitions were found unmeritorious. 3 of the petitioners withdrew their petitions and 1 dismissed for sub judice.
Now, a lot of people have been wondering or pondering on the propriety of the NJC decision, especially as it affects Justice Ademola, where an appeal is quite likely. Project Justice sought the views of some senior lawyers, and here is what they said.
Well, it will be very unfair and unfortunate for anyone to condemn the actions of the NJC. The NJC is the only body that can discipline judges, Superior Court judges. And in a situation where they have come to a conclusion that people who have been accused of committing offenses and for the past 6 months have not been charged to court, it will be wicked and indeed manifestly unconscionable to allow that they continue floating in that limbo of uncertainty. The point really is that if they had any of charges against them, it should have been brought promptly, at least 48 hours after they have been accused of that offense. That's what the Constitution says. But where for 6 months nothing has been said, and the clock is ticking, the biological clock is ticking. There is a time in which these judges will retire. They have their names and reputation to consider. So having given the executive arm of government all that period to consider whether to bring a charge or not, and they have not done so, the presumption is there is nothing against those judges. Or if there is, it cannot stand the test of a prima facie case in the court. So people who are saying this are either just very wicked or ill-informed. You know, see, when a person goes through a trial, even at that point, the presumption of innocence operates in his favor. But upon his being discharged, an appeal is then the luxury of the state to embark upon. It has nothing to do with his innocence or guilt. His innocence has been affirmed by the trial. If it goes on trial and they say, oh, come back and either resume your trial, then the process will kick in and it will either be suspended or will continue working. But the appeal really has nothing to do. It's not on the same footing as the trial. And you cannot say when a man has won round one and is restored back to his office, he should continue at the pleasure of when an appeal will be determined. And then he retires in the process. I think it's unfair.
That decision was long overdue. You will recall that the judges were arrested in a very brazen manner, which involved security agents breaking into their houses in the middle of the night, breaking down their doors, and scaring the living daylights out of those judges and their families in a manner that you would see or you would expect to see if they were going after terrorists, not judges, justices of the Supreme Court, justices of the Court of Appeal. And it was termed a sting operation at the time, which was really a misnomer, because a sting operation is essentially a trap that you set to see if a public officer is corrupt. You offer the person gratification, and if he accepts it, you arrest him under video recording or voice recording or howsoever, but you arrest him with bribe money or other inducement. You catch him red-handed. That's what the sting operation is, to determine whether a public officer is honest or not. Because if you can take bribe under a simulated condition, then he will take it in real life. That's a sting operation. Here, it appears that the security services got some information and decided to raid those judges' housing, hoping to catch evidence. Now, after that, the security services have never explained that they made a mistake. Instead, they charged a few to court, and one of those cases was quickly dismissed for lack of evidence. And the others, 8 months later, we've heard not a word. One of the High Court judges, whom everybody in the whole country knew, was totally innocent. In fact, when they raided it, they found only a few thousand naira. We've still not seen a public apology, but that judge has been back at work all this while. So why would people of that caliber be kept in suspended animation without any explanation? Meanwhile, the same government keeps crying out that there's delay in the hearing of cases. The Supreme Court is unable to it's unable to empanel 2 or 3 panels at the same time. It doesn't have the full complement of justices. The Chief Justice of the Federation has been compelled to sit virtually every day, abandoning other critical administrative duties. Traditionally, the CJN reduces his sitting workload in order to attend to other equally critical things, because he is the head of government, he chairs the NJC, and so on. So I think it's a very, very good thing, and frankly, long overdue. Incidentally, at the meeting of the National Executive Committee of the NBA, which held in Lokoja last Thursday, the lawyers were unanimous in calling for the recall of those judges and justices. Now, if the government still feels that he has a case against these people, they are recalled by the NJC, doesn't prejudice them in any way. Many days already. You can file charges against them, and I'm sure the NJC will suspend their sittings. And I believe that if after 8 months the government was unable to file charges against them, it means the government probably doesn't have a case.
What the NJC did was proper. It's in compliance with the rule of law. And I don't see anything about it. That is how it should be. You will recall that each of those cases were reviewed, deliberated upon, and before coming to that conclusion. Those that were found wanting earlier were either shown the way out, suspended, or reprimanded. So is it because they have done what they are supposed to do that people are now asking questions? There's nothing wrong about that. What they have done is in compliance with the rule of law. It's clearly backed up by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. In fact, it would have been otherwise, because some of us are already thinking of going to court on that to compel the NJC to reinstate them. If you look at reasons that prevailed in the NJC then, was to protect the sanctity of the profession and the judiciary. Don't forget that the presumption of innocence still there in their favor, and it's constitutional in nature. And from the 8 of them that have been recalled, none has any case pending. None. In the case of the Federal High Court Judge, Justice Ademola, he's been discharged and acquitted. Can you name one person among the list of 8 judges that were recalled, or justices, as the case may be? He said that there is no merit in the petition, or they have gone through full-blown trial and have been discharged and acquitted by the court.
As we said earlier, there was so much noise made following the raid of the judges. Of the 2 Supreme Court justices arrested, only one has so far been charged to court, 8 months after. Only one has had his trial concluded and found not guilty, talking about Justice Adeniyi Ademola. So what could be wrong? Was the anti-graft agency too much in a hurry? Did they do enough due diligence of investigation and evidence gathering that would be unassailable in court before going public? Is it also the fault of the judiciary, as some may conclude that the cases have all but collapsed? We took up some of these issues some time ago in the wake of the arrest of the judicial officers on this show. Here is the interview one more time. Thank you very much, Barrister Nubudu, for granting us this time.
Thank you so much.
Is Nigeria on the right path in its war against corruption?
Oh, big question. On the right path in one sense, on the wrong path in another sense. On the right path in the sense that there appears to be a unanimity, a mutual understanding, a mutual acceptance, summarily a mutuality by Nigerians that corruption is evil, that corruption must be fought headlong if we are to make the socio-economic progress we desire to make as a nation. There appears to also be a recognition of this fact by the leading class. And also, along that breadth, we have a president who appears to appreciate this reality and who appears to be putting his right foot forward in the fight against corruption. So to that extent, we can be said to be on the right path. But we cannot be said to be on the right path when we now look at the modus operandi, when we now look at the infrastructure, the logistics for fighting corruption, when we now look at the methodology being employed by the present administration in the fight against corruption, then we're not on the right path. If anything, the methodology is so counterproductive that it might negative the war against corruption. It might not take us anywhere, as it hasn't taken us anywhere so far.
What's wrong with the methodology? Because there are some people who agree with the methodology and say we've gotten to that point in our political history and our national life where if you don't tackle it headlong the way you are doing it now, then you're likely not going to have results.
Well, like I said, if the tackling is headlong, those people will be right. But with all due respect to them, particularly those who are in the Presidential Committee Against Corruption, they either do not understand what the fight against corruption is, or There may be some fifth columnists actually that want to sabotage the president in ensuring that he does not win this war. Because I am beginning to see the president as someone who may really be a sincere person after all. I don't know him too closely. But if the issue and what happened concerning the issue of his ill health is anything to go by, you see a president who seems to like to do things properly. You see a president who has regard for honesty and integrity. You see the man not feeling well enough and taking a vacation to go and attend to his health, and was polite enough to Nigerians to tell us so. And while leaving, he obeyed Section 145 of the Constitution and transmitted power to the Vice President to ensure that there is no vacuum in governance. The advisors, the aides are around to implement. And if they are the kind of persons that tell him that you can ignore the rule of law, you can ignore due process, then they are misleading the president. That is why during the last roundtable on anti-corruption, you had the chief judge tell the committee and the roundtable, including the vice president that was there, point blank, that the only way you can fight corruption is by following the due process of the law, by following the rule of law. And if you don't like any particular law, you amend it. You have an EFCC that is supposed to be fighting corruption. Once you fight corruption, Nigerians are going to support you. But once you fight as though you are pursuing a vendetta against some perceived enemies of the government or against some persons that are not in your good book, it will be clear because the Nigerians are no longer as ignorant as they were 20, 30 years ago.
But could the overzealousness, perceived overzealousness of the EFCC not have any linkage to what they perceive to be the body language of a president who is very passionate about fighting corruption, and perhaps the chairman of the EFCC or the acting chairman of the EFCC is trying to impress his boss to say, look, I'm just fighting corruption just the way you want it?
They are, if that's what they are doing, they are apparently impressing the president the wrong way. What? If from what I've just said, I see the president as a man who wants things done properly, who is apparently a man who wants to create the semblance of honesty in governance, then that man would certainly have wanted to follow due process. If, for instance, in traveling abroad, he knows the constitution requires him to transmit power to his vice under section 145 and he obeyed, that same man will not tell the EFCC to ignore section 36 of the constitution, which says that anybody accused of any criminal offense is presumed innocent until found guilty. And the same EFCC, aware of the provisions of that constitution, having lawyers in his employ who knows the law, will still go ahead and arrest someone as they did with Obanikoro. Arrest someone for allegation, detain him, in other words, and impose a condition that he must deposit 100 million naira before you grant him bail. In other words, you have found him guilty. In other words, you have concluded he actually took the money. He has the money from where he must bring out 100 million to deposit before he can be granted bail. Now, that is the way the war against corruption is being fought under the present EFCC. And that is why most of the senators feel that if that is the approach, this is not the kind of war against corruption we want. So it's not about corruption, fighting corruption. No, it's about the modus operandi, which is antithetical to the maintenance of fundamental human rights and other, innate principles of our constitution that makes us a democratic society.
It does appear that it's quite difficult to rule out excesses in situations like this. Are there no institutional safeguards to protect against such excesses?
That is why you see some of us were very livid when the DSS did that raid against the judges. Because the judiciary is the last hope of the common man in situations like this. That's where anybody whose rights has been trampled upon, or wherever the security agencies have overreached themselves, could run to for reprieve. But when the same judges are now themselves being hounded, being blackmailed, being harassed, you break into a judge's house at midnight, bundle him like a common criminal. How would these judges have the courage to dispense justice? Particularly when some of those judges, like Justice Dimba, was a judge that had been carrying on his job with diligence and integrity and courage.
And for the records,
orders against the DSS.
For the records, it has just been cleared by the NJC.
I'm not surprised. Because we know Justice Dimba. We know we're not saying that there are no one or two Judases among the 12 disciples in the judiciary. We're not saying that there may be no, one or two bad eggs. But they are so negligible. They are so much in the minority compared to what goes on in the legislature. and the worst that goes on in the executive, with all due respect. So if there's any place where the searchlight on anti-corruption should be beamed, it should be the executive. So for Magu to fail to do that and be concentrating on the legislature and even the saint among the three arms, because if you compare the judiciary, legislative and the executive, the judiciary is like a saint in governance, better than the other two arms. So for Maguto and the DSS and the present EFCC to concentrate on the judiciary, then it was not a fight against corruption. The whole intent was to intimidate the judges, intimidate the judicial arm, so that it will not provide the requisite checks and balances against the intended or ongoing excesses of the executive. And that is what every Nigerian must deprecate. And that makes that question you have asked now very relevant. So moving forward, therefore, there must be a retooling, a rekitting of the entire anti-corruption war. First of all, the president, with all due respect, I'm advising, he can take my advice, he may choose to throw it away, but that's the view of many Nigerians. That so-called Presidential Action Committee Against Corruption, or whatever it's called, headed by Professor Isesage, should be disbanded immediately. They have achieved nothing, they've been of no help, they've rather rolled back the wheels of the anti-corruption war and the success that have been made by the ICPC and EFCC and other agencies of government that have been involved in the fight against corruption. Secondly, there must be a deliberate effort to strengthen the judiciary so that it can deal with these perceived excesses, as it is in the United States. You could see how President Trump, in his zeal to put America first, immediately issued presidential orders, banning immigrants. But people could go to court, and the court, district judge, could make an order stopping Trump, and that order is obeyed immediately.
That's checks and balances.
Checks and balances.
All right.
We don't have that efficacy of that check right in Nigeria, and the only way to get about it is there must be full independence of the judiciary in terms of funding, complete independence. Also, in terms of method of appointment of the chief judge, the recent incidents has thrown up an innate incongruity in our law, which needs to be amended immediately. That is the provision of section 231 subsection 1, which requires the president to submit the name of the chief judge to the National Assembly for confirmation. That, for me, is wrong. If we are talking about having three independent arms, the executive independent, legislature independent, judiciary independent, then nobody and no other arm should be responsible for choosing who becomes the chief judge of the federation. For instance, when the president is appointing his ministers, he only sends their name to the National Assembly for approval. He doesn't send to the judiciary. When the National Assembly is electing its principal officers, it does that by itself without consulting the judiciary. Why should the chief judge be the one that the president must nominate first? House National Assembly must confirm second before he's appointed. That subjects and makes the judiciary appear inferior to the other arms.
There's been so much talk about the war against corruption being a show to impress and devoid of real substance. Critics have lashed out very strongly at what they call media trial by the EFCC, which at the end does not yield much. However, it is also a known fact that fighting corruption is not an easy task. And that is why the EFCC and other anti-graft agencies need modern tools, especially in the area of investigation. The war must also be free from political influence and interest. It must be all-encompassing. And here is where the support of the majority of Nigerians will be galvanized towards this common goal. Well, that's Project Justice this week. Do remember to follow us on our Twitter handle. Is at ProJustice Live. Also like Project Justice on Facebook and view us on YouTube. On behalf of the entire team, I am JUDICIAL. Thanks for staying with us.